known since the 1950s that the brain plays a very important role in body fat mass regulation. So back then what they did was they made lesions to a bunch of different parts of the brain, and they determined that by making lesions in specific parts of the brain within a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, they could produce either morbid obesity or extreme anorexia. And by the 1980s, it was known that there was a circulating factor that was communicating information from fat tissue to the brain, and that was involved in controlling body fatness. So in 1994, Jeffrey Friedman's group discovered what the circulating factor was and called it leptin. So essentially how the system works is leptin is produced in proportion to fat mass. It then is sensed by the hypothalamus and certain other parts of the brain, and then feeds back in a classic negative feedback loop, which maintains body fatness within a certain range, sometimes referred to as a set point. So when leptin was initially discovered, the pharmaceutical industry was preparing for an absolute bonanza because they thought they might have a cure for common obesity. And so they did some trials. What they did was they took a group of obese people, gave them leptin injections, fairly large doses, and at the end of the trial, they were still obese. So they lost some fat mass, but not enough to bring them back to the lean level. And what they discovered is that actually obese people have a lot of leptin. They have a lot more leptin than a lean person, in fact. So how does this work? If leptin acts to constrain fat mass by this negative feedback loop, how is it that obese people can have more leptin than lean people? Well, the current model is that there's a degree of leptin resistance that develops in the brain. So the brain's not hearing this leptin signal as well. So what happens at that point, the brain thinks it's starving essentially, and it activates a starvation program, which involves increasing food intake, decreasing energy expenditure, and accumulating fat in fat mass. So at that point, the fat accumulation continues until leptin has been increased to the point where it overcomes that resistance in the brain. And at that point, the person has reached a new homeostatic set point at which body fatness and leptin are essentially stable at a new level, a new higher level. So what's increasing the set point? That's the big question.